Good, but we'll see. Hello everyone, Devin Cook, as Nij and David said, and it's my pleasure to be here to moderate this panel. As Nij and Lisa and I have begun talking about these different topics, we were really amazed at just how closely aligned the work that we do with the Inclusive Innovation Challenge and at the Initiative on the Digital Economy, and the work that they do really is. This alignment was exciting to us, and so I am really thrilled to be here, so thank you. So one of the things that David pointed out is, I lead the Inclusive Innovation Challenge, and we actually had a rebrand since last year, which was we were the Inclusive Innovation Competition. We really changed because we thought that competition was a bit of a misnomer, since in the thinking about what's to come in the future of work, it can't be a competition. It really is this opportunity to face a grand challenge. And the grand challenge can be something really scary. And some of the statistics that are being cited, 1 in 10 jobs is a risk of automation. That is a very scary possibility for the future for many people. But at the same time, there are incredible organizations, like those we're going to hear from in just a moment, that are finding ways to take on this challenge head on and find incredible solutions to it. So I'm really looking forward to digging into some of those solutions right now with the panel. So I'd like to invite them all on up to the stage. All right. And just a bit of housekeeping. If you see me looking over this way, I'm just looking at the clock to make sure that we're able to get all of this knowledge out into the room before 5-ish o'clock, right? Yeah. All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce some people that you know and some people you will get to know momentarily. Lisa Neuberger Fernandez, of course, Managing Director of Accenture's Corporate Citizenship. We have George Westerman, my colleague and friend from the Initiative on the Digital Economy, Principal Research Scientist. We have Gerald Chertavian, Founder and CEO of YearUp, and I am personally biased towards YearUp since they were a grand prize winner in the Inclusive Innovation Challenge last year. So very excited about their work, as I'm sure you all are or will be. And then lastly, we have Gayatri Agnew, who is the Director of Opportunity at Walmart Giving. So very excited to be here with all of you today. So to get us started, we've already heard about the research that has just been launched, which we're all really looking forward to digging into. So first, Lisa, it would be great to hear more about why did you decide to undertake this research at Accenture in the first place?
Absolutely. So when we launched Skills to Succeed in 2010 with the goals of equipping 3 million people with the skills to get a job or to build a business by 2020, and we were facing an economic situation that looks very different than the economy today that Nij was just describing. In 2010, we were just coming out of the global recession. We were seeing incredibly high unemployment rates and particularly high youth unemployment rates around the world. And fast forward to the present time, while unemployment rates, particularly youth unemployment rates are still high, 35% globally, it's more of a tight labor market, particularly in countries like the US, and some of the biggest issues now are more about wage rates and skills gaps than it is about unemployment. The biggest forces that are shaping the economy today are these forces of rapid, unprecedented velocity and pace of technological change. And those are the forces that we're wondering, are the Skills to Succeed programs really future-proofed for the economy that we're seeing today and the economy that we expect to see in the future? So we wanted to take stock in what we've learned from 7 years of Skills to Succeed and see, are we indeed future-proofed with our programs and how we're engaging with over 500 NGO partners and other ecosystem partners as we look out into a future that seems more uncertain. And as Nij described, the one thing that's very clear is that change is afoot. And so when you think about the skilling equation and what skills are we preparing people for, the most critical thing that came out is about the growth mindset and the change that's afoot. So if we can't predict exactly what the new jobs are, what we can predict is that careers are taking no longer the very linear route of times past, and we can expect to have multiple employers, possibly multiple employers at the same time, and many jobs and pathways. So how to prepare somebody for that? And this is all about resilience and being ready to change. And when we look at our own business, when we think about what does it take to be ready to change, the first kind of fundamental skill is believing that you can learn something new and being ready for that approach. So we see that previously the debate about skills was about what are the hard skills and what are the soft skills that you need to get a job, to build a business. And now we see that it's really that growth mindset at the heart of the soft skills that is that engine that's going to take you through. And so we wanted to do research on what are these skills that will make a difference, and how do we help people not just get their foot in the door, but persist and advance and move on and evolve in their careers. So that's really why we conducted this research.
Great. And I have heard Gerald's colleague Sean Bowen call the soft skills harder skills, because often those are the toughest skills for people to learn and engage in their day-to-day, and I love that. And George and I was actually talking about that yesterday at another event, the harder skills. But the harder skills, those are the individual trends that we're seeing, those new skills that are going to be more and more required in this new economy. The driver behind the needs of those new skills is really the fact that we're in kind of an unprecedented state in the digital economy, right? Our colleagues at the ID have written the book, The Second Machine Age. The World Economic Forum calls this the fourth industrial revolution. Clearly, this isn't our first rodeo, that things are very different. We've gone through the industrial revolution. We're in a new world. So why are things so different now in the digital economy than they've really been before?
Well, we had these waves of change that happen over and over again in economies, and each one's terrible, and each one we managed to get through. And this wave is really being driven really by two major trends. And one of those major trends is just the amazing speed that things are operating at now. And that's not only expectations of the customers, but it's also the ability to deliver that, and that cycles, and it gets faster and faster. So that's one trend. The other trend is just the death of routine work. And our colleague David Otter, Daron El-Samoglu have done a lot of work saying, listen, the only great jobs growing right now are the non-routine jobs. And if you look at the skill distribution, the low end is still there, the high end is still there, the middle is being hollowed out. The middle is a lot of the routine work that computers can do now. The danger is, and we're seeing it already, computers are getting really good at routine work lower in the distribution. Just think the 4 million people that drive trucks right now. And also at the higher end. This is happening with AI. Computers are writing things now. They're doing translation and doing all kinds of things where computers can be as interactive as some of the workers that we work with. So speed and then death routine, what does that mean? How do we think about what that means for skills? Well, the way we think about it is, I'm not an economist, but I hang with a bunch of economists. And we think about it in terms of substitutes and complements. So in terms of substitutes, if the computers are substituting for you in routine work, that's a dangerous situation. And also, if they're substituting for you in traditional, slow processes, you lose jobs, you lose business there. But there's always an opportunity in complements. And the way I think about complements is if you're in a war, you may not want to run a restaurant, you may not want to run a hotel, but you can do a really good business selling bullets. And so what are the selling bullets in a war in this kind of a trend? Well, there's a couple of them. If there's only routine work, then there's an awful lot of non-routine work happening. If we need to operate faster, we need to innovate, we need to invent. We're working in projects, we're not working in roles. And we're constantly pushing the collaboration, and we're constantly pushing the more cognitive kind of work. And it's interesting to see those things popping up there, because that's exactly what we would expect in this situation, managing these trends. So it's good to see it there, and we can have a further conversation about how do you develop some of those skills, how do you develop a growth mindset, how do you find the right people. It's a fascinating challenge.
Absolutely. And those are some of the macro trends that we're seeing. Clearly, those are going to be affecting all different industries. We're not looking at particular sectors, but we're seeing the impacts of that across different jobs, different industries, et cetera.
And by the way, the other selling bullets in a war is, if technology is growing, get some technology skills. And so we're building those up in people too.
Right. Lifelong learning. Right. And so as we think about the different industries and the way that those trends that you talked about and the death of routine and speed are affecting them, I'm curious actually to hear about if that resonates for you in retail. Certainly I think we probably as consumers are seeing many cash registers are being automated self-service, but there's far deeper implications of this, and then the implications of those changes on the needs of skills in retail.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Devin. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys this evening. I think I'll just walk you through how everybody got the last carton of milk that you got. So just pause for a second. Things are enormously complicated. Things are speeding up. But how many of you had that carton of milk brought to your door by somebody else? 2 of you? How many of you went to the store and picked up that carton of milk yourself? Okay. So e-commerce is alive and well. So is brick and mortar retail, because we all need to pick up that carton of milk on the way home sometimes. So I need to start with that because it's grounding, right? Folks are like, oh, it's all going online. I'm like, a lot of it's going online. It's not all going online. So yes, I think retail is a fascinating sector to think about, how a lot of the trends that you guys just outlined are shifting. And I think a couple of the call outs I would make is, A, they're shifting because of us. They're shifting because of the consumer. They're not shifting because someone in retail said it would be interesting if we did this. It's coming from demand, and it's coming from this idea that I want to consume goods the way that I live my life. And many aspects of the way that we live our lives are becoming more seamless and more frictionless and easier for us. And so what does that look like in the retail environment? And it looks like a lot of different things. For Walmart, it looks like a move into omni-channel. And so we think about it as, it doesn't matter where you get that carton of milk, but for you, based on your personal needs, we want to make that as easy as possible and as seamless as possible for you to get that milk. So for me, it's picking it up on my way home with the kids in the car without having to get out of the car. That's what's easy for me. For you, who said it was delivered to your door, it's having it delivered to your door. For some of you who, picked it up in other ways, it's other ways. And I think the concept of personalization in all of this is enormously important, right? Because without the technology to personalize, we as a company as large as Walmart we couldn't personalize, but now we can. So there's this enormous demand on the customer side to personalize options for consumption in the case of retail. On the flip side then, we need to be able to have a system, and the majority of that system is currently made up of our people that can pivot to accommodate the seamlessness of the expectations that customers are having. And so what that looks like for every different level of our human value chain of our workers is going to be a little bit different. So what that's going to look like for our truck drivers in the future state is different, for our distribution center workers is different. What that looks like today for our cashiers is that fewer of them are classified as cashiers. In the last 2 years, we have shifted thousands of cashier roles into a new role that we call host. So a host is the person who staffs typically 3 or 4 self-checkout lines. But again, to the point about it really all comes down to humans. For those of you that bought that carton of milk, how many of you went through a self-checkout line? Okay, you're helping me with my points. So those of you that didn't go through a self-checkout line, I'm assuming a human rung up your groceries for you. So again, I drive this toward the human behavior because the technology is there for us to run stores without humans, but humans don't actually want to shop in stores that are run without humans. Some do, and so again, to this point of personalization, but if you're going to meet the needs of customers across the spectrum, my mother will never make it through the self-checkout line, bless her heart, she just won't, right? That's not how she is going to get her milk, but that works just fine for me and others of you. So I think it really does come down to personalization, and then it comes down to I would say shifts in work across how work used to get done. Because fundamentally the same things are happening inside of a store, they're just happening in different orders, and they're typically being managed by different people and partners. And the last thing I would say is that 3 years ago you could get a job at Walmart without knowing how to use a handheld device. Today that is not true. It's simply not true. You actually can't even apply for a job at Walmart without knowing how to use a handheld device, or I guess technically a computer. But that's an intentional, I don't want to say barrier, but it's an intentional part of our hiring process because we need to know that our associates can do that.
It's interesting, we put this concept of digital fluency as one of the fundamental building blocks. Like historically you would have the fundamental building blocks of skills as being the employability, entrepreneurial skills, and we added, you would have numeracy, literacy, but we added digital fluency in there because we think it's really table stakes now. So that really proves the point.
Right. And out of curiosity, how do you test for that when people come in to apply for a job?
So everything, we aren't using paper applications anymore, so that's not an option.
Right.
So we're not so much testing for it as we are shifting our processes so that you actually can't get to step 2 without having at least some level. Now, I will say, because we had a little bit of a debate on this in the office the other day, we had some guests in from the Council on Foreign Relations who were doing a task force on the future of the U.S. economy, and they were really worried about literacy levels, and they were asking some of our talent development folks how they manage literacy challenges for frontline service sector workers, and the team on talent development was kind of snickering a little bit, and what came out was, well, that's a lot easier on a tablet because you don't have to use words, you use images. And so it's interesting because while we use the term digital literacy, being digitally literate isn't necessarily the same thing as being able to read and write, right? These are actually different skill sets. And so while I think in many ways, and again, if you are able to read, that is an enormous asset in job development and growth, but you can operate a cash register through pictures, not just words, and they're designed that way to accommodate workers at different skill levels.
It's fascinating. You're talking about, you were talking first about redesigning the cashier job, and now you're talking about allowing people that wouldn't normally be cashiers to do it because the computers do a lot of the work that people would have normally had to do. One of the trends I'm seeing in some retail things when we talk about marginalized population is that people that we would have considered cognitively challenged that we would never put out there on the cash register are suddenly able to do a phenomenal job. They're incredibly motivated, they love people, and now they can do this, and they never would have had a job before.
Absolutely right. It's a really important point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talk about inclusivity from both the standpoint of economic inclusion, but also its inclusion of diversity of abilities, capabilities. So it's a population we need to think about as well. And thinking about the different people that are behind all these decisions that you're making, Gerald, you work with opportunity youth and giving them those digital skills, placing them in jobs. But I'd love to hear more, and for the benefit of the group, a little bit about who are those opportunity youth. They're an incredible group of people. And what does it take to get a kid hired today that may be different from what it took 5 to 10 years ago?
Right, and let me just start by saying for all my friends at Accenture, thanks for doing the work you're doing here, and also partnering with MIT. You've made not just a small investment in this, it's a multi-year effort to understand skills, and really thinking about it for underserved populations as well. I think it's courageous, bold, thoughtful, and just a great corporate endeavor. So I just want to start by saying thanks for that.
Love Europe.
Oh, thank you. Feelings mutual. So Europe is right now the country's largest and fastest growing youth serving organization that was started in the century. And what we do is work with low-income 18 to 24-year-olds, and in 1 year enable them to go from low income or no income to a professional career that averages around $20 an hour. So it's kind of, before you're up, it's probably $5,000 on average. After 1 year, on average, about $40,000. Typically in technology, finance, customer service, sales, operations. In large companies, you name the big company, we probably have talked with them, worked with them, most of your big banks, most of your big tech companies, professional services as well. And so who we serve is interesting. It's opportunity youth that technically just defined as out of school, out of work, and don't have one high school degree. When you think about who does that represent, it's 22% of young adults of color in the United States of America. So about 1 out of 5 young adults of color, 1 out of 6.5 all young adults of color, and all young adults in the country. So you think about, we have a country today where 16% of all youth, 22% of youth of color are out of school, out of work, and don't have one high school degree, right? If you think, well, how are you going to have a democracy? How are you going to have a civil society? Right? How are you going to have any semblance of economic mobility when you have a population where that defines between 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 young people in this country? So in the big, I think opportunity here is to shift our perception. Because so often we look at that group and we see social liability rather than economic asset. And so whether you call it the media, or a lot of different reasons, when we look at a young adult on the street, who may fit that description. Why is our response more often to clutch our wallet rather than to say, maybe that's someone I want to hire? Right? So there's a perception about who's talented, where talent resides in this country, and how do you access talent in this country. And I would argue that unless the good Lord distributed IQ by zip code, which I don't dare say she or he did, that the talent is distributed evenly across the United States. But unfortunately, opportunity isn't. And so we have a real misperception going on as to who's talented, as opposed to who has potential, right? And I would argue that the young adults that we serve every day have had a woefully low level of preparation to compete in the labor market, both of today and increasingly tomorrow, which will get harder rather than easier. And so it's amazing. We expect everyone to run the same race to compete for jobs in this country. Yet one athlete got the best training, the best nutrition, all the best equipment, the coaching, the track that was perfectly aligned, the shoes that were the best. And then another athlete starts not only 20 yards behind the start line, but shows up in flip-flops and hasn't had a good meal to eat in the last week. And then you say it's a fair race, let's go. Right? Hey, if you don't work hard, you don't make it in this country. So there's a fundamentally different level of preparation we give some folks versus others. And it has more to do with the structure of opportunity in this country than it does with are people able to learn the skills they need to learn. If we've had 18,000 young people coming from the most isolated pockets of poverty in the United States of America, working at Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Microsoft, Salesforce, Accenture, Bank of America, JP Morgan, NASA, the Federal Reserve, in 1 year, right? And these are young adults who many folks would have said, easier to lock up than educate. If in 1 year you can do that with a relatively finite investment, then well, whose really challenge is this? And I would argue it's the adults in the room who create the systems and buck the perceptions and say, wait a minute, we can do a much better job in this country. And whether it's, I think, the very thoughtful work Accenture has done. I just read a book by Joe Ayun from Northeastern, who's also talking about the future skills and how to characterize those. So right now we have a different lexicon. What do we call these things? We kind of know what it is when you see it, right? And you did a great job of laying that out. I would argue it's less about the clarity of definition than it is the commitment to actually prepare all adults, all young people in this country, to actually get what they need and give them a fair chance to get into the labor market. If we focus there as well, perhaps we have a country where the words land of opportunity become reality and not rhetoric. Because you've seen what happened in this country, both the left and the right, when those words become perceived as rhetoric. Right? You've seen that over the past couple of years in the United States and the amount of angst that that's created. Whether it's Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, it's driven by economic insecurity. It's driven by lack of preparation to compete in the labor market, and people say, I can't even see the next rung on that ladder. Have no idea where it's going to come from. That drives a really bad set of outcomes for folks, and you're seeing it play out. And I think so. Part of this is institutionally, systemically, why are so few people getting adequately prepared? If we accept that IQ is distributed and potential is distributed evenly across all citizens in this country.
And kind of doubling down that point that you brought up, like it's the responsibility of the adults in the room. And going deeper into that, whose responsibility really is it? I mean, is it Europe? Is it Accenture? Is it college and post-secondary educators? Like who should we be looking to really redistribute opportunity in the country and then impart those skills necessary to succeed once that opportunity is given?
I think I know whose responsibility it is, but I think I know who will take the responsibility. Right. Ultimately, the responsibility should be of our public institutions to prepare young people from pre-K through to career readiness, through to middle and high school to be ready to consume post-secondary education. Well, we're proven we're not able to do that evenly. We do it better than anyone else in certain places, but we don't do it evenly and often distributed and impacted by socioeconomic level. I believe what's going to happen is business is going to say, look, public education, I'm real sorry you can't do what I need. I'm going to get in the business of education, right? Because I don't have a workforce to compete unless we get in the business of education and you have a big for-profit industry that is going to be more than happy to step up and say, we will help you, Mr. or Mrs. For-Profit organization who needs talent. and say we will circumvent systems if they don't work better and better over time. Now, one would argue that our public systems will have to adapt, but they're slower than the market needs and slower than the businesses need. And so I think business is going to say, sorry, we're getting in this game in a way that we never have in the past.
That's a call to action, it sounds like.
Definitely a call to action, and I mean, when you think about why we created the Skills to Succeed program to begin with, it was really to start to bridge that gap. So part of the responsibility of the private sector is to signal what the skills are and to make it clear where the gaps are, but when our talent pipelines are being, stretched. And it's interesting, in the room tonight we have a couple of Accenture folks who've been working on expanding our talent pipeline. And I would say that when we started the Skills Succeed program in 2010, we weren't necessarily facing a stark talent shortage for our populations in some countries, like including the United States. But now, today, fast forward to the present time, we are in some cases in entry-level positions. And so the Skills Succeed program has started to expand, and sometimes we call ourselves like Accenture as the Skills to Succeed employer. And how can we expand our talent pipeline and build partnerships with organizations like Europe, so that we're signaling what the skills are that are needed, and we're investing in transitioning young people in a year to be ready for work, and even changing the internal processes that are needed. Because if you looked at our company a couple of years back, if you didn't have a college degree, there was nothing to apply for. But we've actually even gone through the hard work with our HR teams to create another level that goes before the college degree, to make it even technically possible to apply for a job at Accenture, and that's a really important point.
If every company was, I'd say, as enlightened as Accenture is, this problem would get solved so much more quickly, honestly. Because you have to realize you're outliers, right? There are many, many companies.
It's hard to think about that when we're in the middle.
No, I mean, we work with 300 companies across the country, employ probably a majority of American, a huge number of employees. And the work that Accenture is doing is the work that business has to do, which is to say, why do we need a 4-year degree for this? Are there other ways to assess competency over credential, professionalism over pedigree, skills over schools, right? Like, how would we do that authentically to widen the aperture of who has access to even look at a job? And I think that's the work you're doing. I think is going to be instrumental for a country. But look, I have to accept, Europe exists because there's systemic dysfunction in this country, right? We're a hack to a broken labor market for opportunity youth. We shouldn't exist. And ultimately, our aspiration would be that the systems actually are in such a state where you don't need the year-ups of this world. That's really what you're trying to solve for long term. But I think the business will start to demand better accountability from some of our public institutions, especially our community colleges.
Right.
If I can jump in on this, I think, I had the pleasure of being on a panel last week with a colleague from Amazon, and both Amazon and Walmart have built hundreds of classrooms in just the last year alone. And this should draw, I think, a little more attention than it has. And we're building classrooms for the exact reasons that you just articulated. And I'm excited that Walmart's doing this. I think it's a phenomenal effort. We've opened a program called Training Academies. So for 200 of the 4,800 Walmart stores across the US, they're now academy stores, they're training stores. So we run classes through those stores, folks learn, and then they go out on the floor and they practice. And we're seeing incredible results. The students who go through that program, I call those students the learners, the working learners who go through that program are having wonderful outcomes. But one of the things that makes me enormously anxious is that we are not an educational institution. We are an employer in place to serve our customers. And so it is a positive benefit that while workers are with us, we are able to provide them increased tools and education and to upskill them. But I think it is a threat to this idea of democracy that you mentioned, which is that an employer is not a substitute for a high quality education. It's not. There's a concept I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, which is the luxury of learning. And I think that's where this idea of growth mindset really sources from. Now we can empower our frontline workers with a growth mindset through our training academies, and we do, but I hope for many of the workers who come in and have that experience in academies, for those that aren't able to promote and grow careers at Walmart, I hope they are able to get connected to a high quality education system that continues to open other doors for them. And so I hear this a lot about how corporate America is going to step up on education, and we will and we should, but we should all be very concerned about allowing the public education system to get sort of off the hook for this social obligation that exists. And so when you ask whose responsibility is it, it has to be all of ours. Because when we do that, it's his, not mine, and it's hers, not, you know, it's that blame game hurts the learners, it hurts the workers, it hurts our future economy, and it's pretty unproductive.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and if I could just put a quick plug in for, I don't think they're a competitor to any of us, but I just had a chance to watch the film that the Verizon Foundation produced called The Digital Divide. It's phenomenal if you haven't had a chance to see it, and it really points the finger at public education, and it says it starts here. And this concept of digital skills has to start in our classrooms, right? So again, agree with what's been said, but I just not ready to let public education off the hook for
Which
it.
is a good thing, and a perfect segue to a question for George, which is, what is the role of post-secondary education as we think about developing the skills for the future?
I think we need to think about the different kind of post-secondary education institutes. So for example, MIT has the luxury that we can only hire and only accept the very elites. And that's how we work, and that's what we're about. And so, but that doesn't mean that MIT is going to need to teach the same way. And that's why we got into Open edX and other things to say, hey, even though we may not bring them on campus, can we use this same training and take it to India, take it down to Kenya in the digital way? And so we're launching these digital courses and that kind of thing. But I think our society needs to think a little differently too. Is a college degree really needed? So the last research I did said 60% of people with college degrees are working in jobs that don't require college degrees. And that's, you know, there's a story of, you know, the new graduate who's now a barista, but it's happening in many places. That says something. That says, first of all, that the colleges are not necessarily training for what the economy needs, but the other thing is that a lot of the economy doesn't really need a college degree. And so we can be thinking then about what are the skills we're giving in different ways. You know, the corporates, you're training technical skills, you're training job-specific skills, and that leads to a really nice career doing those things. But then, Keontra, the kind of the idea is, you said, what else are we missing in that? One of the things that college gives you that I believe deeply in is liberal arts. Now, we can't necessarily say that it relates to a job, but if the jobs we're looking for are cooperation, creativity, working in teams, the liberal arts help a lot in that. Right? Another thing college does for you in a huge way is get you comfortable with diversity. And those kinds of things they help in a lot of these skills that we need. So I think we need to think, first of all, is whether college degrees are needed. And the other thing we need to think about is those of us who grant degrees, can we figure out ways to extend what we do to populations we wouldn't normally bring into our organizations?
And there's been growing conversation around the role that community colleges can play as well. Would you say anything else in addition to the points about liberal arts, which having gone to a liberal arts school, I like that I'm not becoming rendered obsolete, that's great. But community college, what role does that potentially play?
So the interesting thing about community college is it is a way to get you a certification in some of these skills. And the fact you can get through community college, it's ridiculously hard to do because you tend to be doing this part-time, you tend to be. And so the fact you get through is actually a stamp for approval saying maybe you have this growth mindset, maybe you've got some grit that other people don't have. I think there can be a lot more done with community colleges, though, to say how can we align this with what our local employers need.
One thing that we've seen working with community colleges is the speed to market. So I think to influence MIT's curriculum, you know, I'm not sure how to do that, but we know how to influence the curriculum of the community college and how to create courses. So not necessarily taking it all in-house, but working with the community college like Accenture does with Wright Community College in Chicago in IT and tech training, where we can signal clearly what we'll be willing to recruit and interview and hire for, and courses can be stood up. We can bring in guest faculty, etc., and that can be a faster time to market. I think also with Europe, with courses like that extending talent pipeline, I would imagine that the time to market of a new course at Europe is always going to be faster than a course at a university or in a public school.
Actually, if I could ask you, Jared, one of the things that I believe you do is you not only train them with these skills, but you get them college credits. So what was the thinking behind making that happen?
I think a degree is a proxy for a set of skills, right? And it's a blunt sorting mechanism that we tend to use because we can't deal with so many folks coming at us at one time. So we say we just sort out people who have a 4-year degree. The increase in asking for 4-year degrees in roles that didn't need it has increased significantly just in the last 5 years, probably post the crash that started. So it's really, employers don't really want degrees. They want skills, attitudes, behaviors. But in the absence of anything else, an easy way to sort is to use a degree. So we also have to recognize there is still a reality in this country and a bias, probably a different bias here than some other European countries around who's valuable in this country, right? What do we value? And we tend to value a 4-year degree in this country. When you say college, most people assume, oh, it's a 4-year degree. Now, if we just do a quick test, do me the favor, raise your hand if you have a 4-year college degree. Keep it up if you got it between the ages of 18 and 22. Just look around. Okay, put your hands down. I think about 98% of the hands were up for those 2 questions. If you ask those same 2 questions of any 100 adults in the United States of America, go pick any 100 adults, ask those 2 questions, guess what percent of hands would be up?
Actually, that's out of Cambridge.
No, that's out of Cambridge, in Boulder. So how many hands, what percent of hands would be up after those 2 questions, do you think, of any 100 adults in the United States? 98% of ours were. 40, 30, 20, 8 hands would be up. 8 hands. Right, so if you imagine only 8 out of 100 adults have a 4-year degree that they got between the ages of 18 and 22. Right, the average age of a BA is about 27 now. Right, the average person in college today works 30 hours a week. Right, all college, not just low-income individuals, all people in college today. Yet we think about a system designed in our own self-image because, rightly or wrongly, we tend to be the people making policies and decisions. And so to kind of say what really is the concomitant, pay-worthy, and credit-worthy activities people are going to do at the same time so they can move through learning, earning, continuing to learn, continuing to earn. We've got to rethink of that process, I think, if we're really going to advantage people going forward. And it is a big rethinking. I mean, it's not easy. And when I was looking at your infinity loop, right, of the figure 8, you had the skills on the left and you had a growth mindset in the specialized on the right. One may conceive of K-12 as being the left. If you really build up a lot of those skills, especially learn to earn prior to high school graduation, and then obviously cultivating growth mindset then as well, and then you say, where do you now want to start to focus and specialize those? Might be one way to think about where systemically do we need to get those skills. And I absolutely agree with you, is we'll never work around the system. Business will never work around the system. It's called public education. But who will drive public education to change? If Walmart goes to a community college and say, hey, I'll hire 500 or 1,000 people, if you do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, that community college is going to start to pay attention in ways that I think they may not have in the past because their funding, and being the chair of a community college here, is now shifting to results-based more than it ever has in the past. So we're now paid on different factors than we were 5 years ago by our state.
Just jumping in on that example, one of the concepts you guys had up there was this fluidity of work. And I think we have to get a lot more comfortable with the reality of the fluidity of learning. And so the way that we use terminal completion of education to signify some sort of finished state, it is actually enormously false today. That the one thing we can know is that no matter how far you've gone in education, even if you've gone technically as far as one can go, you're not done learning. But our system sort of tells you that you are. You put the cap and gown and you've got the skills you need now to work. And I think we perpetuate this in the design of our educational workforce systems with a concept of train and place. You get trained here in the education system and then you get placed here in work. But as we think about what fluidity looks like across work, that same kind of fluidity is coming and needs to continue to come with learning. And we've been doing a lot of work on the Walmart Foundation side and looking at this concept of dual retention, which, to your point, the vast majority, in fact, I think it's 75–80% of college students are working. So we know that. That's not the minority, that's almost everybody. We know they're working. And as we've been working with different educational institutions across the country, we've asked them, where are your students working? What are they doing? And are you, as an educational institution, connecting their jobs, which they see as something that gets in the way of them doing school, to their outcomes of learning? Well, no, because she or he is studying to be a nurse and he's just working at Walmart. Okay, let's pause for a second, go back to that graph and say, like, what is it that someone working as a customer service host at Walmart may be able to carry into their career in healthcare? An enormous amount. But our system says those aren't the same. Those are different things and they need to be separate and apart. And so I think giving learners the courtesy of respecting the fluidity of their learning across work and education, and recognizing that they're gaining skills in both, is enormously important. And so this concept of dual retention, which data and evidence is bearing out to prove true, is that basically if the educator knows the student is working and knows where, and the work environment knows the student is learning and knows where, and there's a connection point for that student between those two institutions, they're more likely to stay in both, which is really fascinating, right? As opposed to the exact opposite.
That's fascinating. This concept of the fluidity of learning, I think that's one of the big insights that came out of this research, which is about the mindset shift that we need to move away from K through 12 through whatever post-secondary degree you're going to achieve. That's it. That's your learning for life. And then you go on the job, and then you're going to learn on the job. But that's no longer the case. I think we can all agree on that, and we need to shift the expectations with young people and with educators that the goal is to be prepared to learn throughout your life, and that lifelong learning is the thing that's going to allow you to persist and to evolve and adapt. So,
absolutely.
Totally.
There's another piece on this that I think that we should talk about, which is the aspiration. Right. So let me just tell you a quick story. Before I was married, before I had kids, I spent a lot of time in the inner city. And I wanted to hang out with the little kids, because who doesn't want to work with little kids, right? And they told me to work with the older teen boys. And I said, why? They said, well, you're big. Nobody else will work with them. And,
Tall enough.
Yeah, and so I did. And it turned out, just for all the reasons you were talking about, Cheryl, this is just an untapped marketplace. But on the other side, in addition to their skills being there and not recognized, they didn't even know what was possible for them. And so the best thing we could do for them at the time was get them into the military. But the problem with getting them in the military is fantastic, and it did great things for these people, but they had to leave their community to do it, and they rarely came home. And so these people would leave, and everybody else behind wouldn't see them. And what's happening with what you're doing is the idea that these people can stay in their community, build up skills, get a good job, and they stay there. They then become models that everybody else can work for and say, that's possible for me. And I think that goes not only for after you're out of school, but it starts to affect you when you're in school. You start saying, if that's possible for me, what do I want to be doing? And that idea of us pulling as institutions and as corporations pulling these skills out, I think the idea of putting that aspiration in and helping them push themselves is huge.
I do want to share, building on that, one quick anecdote out of the Walmart Training Academies, which is we asked the academy facilitators, what are some of the shifts or changes that you're seeing in the workers that are going through Training Academy? And one of the ones that I suppose if you pause and think about these issues as often as many of us in the room do, you won't be surprised to hear this, but a lot of our store managers were surprised to hear this, which is that associates were reporting being more comfortable and better able to help their kids with their homework. This isn't school. We're teaching them how to stock shelves at Walmart. We're teaching them how to clean the store. We're teaching them how to do efficient procedures and processes, but we're teaching it to them in a classroom, not just inside the Walmart Supercenter. And so we're creating for our workers a differential kind of comfort with a learning environment that more than likely they did not experience as they touched the public education system. And that anecdote really stands out to me, and as I've been able to talk to parents who work in our stores and are able to share that, it's really meaningful because it starts to get into a shift in aspiration and a shift in modeling and behavior that can carry into following generations. It's really important, and that's not why we designed the training academies that way. We designed them that way so we can get the inventory to flow differently through our store, and that's
External
important
benefit.
too. But it's a huge benefit, and so we do need to think about the social implications of some of the choices that companies are making around learning.
In the interest of learning and flipping our classroom, I want to make sure to leave a couple minutes here for questions. Anyone have a question queued up that they've been dying to ask?
I have a question. Out of curiosity, where do you all perform your training at for your program?
So half of it is in a newer model we developed, which is in partnership with community colleges. So we're almost like ROTC goes into a 4-year, we're professional training core, PTC, within a community college. So you're in a suit and tie, you're in some additional classes for professionalism, customer service, and then learning very marketable skills. And we actually partner with those community colleges. We brought our cost base down about 40% by doing that. We do have 8 sites that we still own and operate. Everything is our own, and we're in 21 cities around the country.
The reason I ask that is because you were talking about the advantage of being on a college campus and the diversity and all the skills that you have from doing that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you take these children who are now exposed to the college campus up to a university or something like MIT and integrated them with some students from there, what the learning curve would be like, or how the aspirations that you use, would they be able to recognize their aspirations to really work that cycle?
We're seeing that with students who are in the community colleges. In fact, 2 things we're seeing. One, it's good for them to be within a higher ed environment. But the other students who aren't in Europe are now dressing up to look like our students because our students are doing really well. The faculty are loving working with our young adults. And so I would argue community colleges have never actually never felt the responsibility to talk about attitude or behavior. Yet they're trying to prepare folks to work, in many cases, some cases transfer. But teachers aren't sitting and thinking about how do you become a professional, what's the decorum, how do you exist in a knowledge-based environment. I would argue if community colleges aren't doing that and your mom and dad didn't teach you, where are you going to learn those professional skills to help you feel comfortable and have the efficacy that I could walk into Goldman Sachs and actually compete if nothing in your background has even prepared you to think you would be able to walk into a glass and steel building and compete and do well there.
One of the things we're doing at MIT right now, trying to get some people in, and I don't know whether you've heard about this idea of the micro masters. So we have these online training courses that are phenomenal, and it's just, our Office of Digital Learning does amazing things there, but they've always just been that you get a certificate and you're done. And what we've started doing now is saying, you get your certificate in supply chain management, the very best students are automatically admitted to a master's program with us. And they can come from anywhere in the world and get in, and that's one of the ways that we're trying to reach out and get there. And what we're thinking through now is how can we do more in our local areas about reaching out and having connections in those ways too.
So, hold hands. Yes, in the middle.
First of all, it's been an absolute treat listening to you guys. My head's just been nodding and nodding and nodding because I have agreed with everything that's been said. I was I guess it's a comment, not really a question, and maybe something you guys might be able to share your reflection on. But what I'm hearing from the beginning of the conversation to the end of the conversation is, as the business world, we're moving from developing mechanical machines to intelligent machines. And the missing part is adding emotional IQ to our machines. And if you look at education, we are moving from developing technical skills to being able to understand those soft skills, which again requires self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And emotions have always been a taboo topic in both of those worlds. I mean, we don't teach our kids emotional self-awareness in school, and you are not allowed to be emotional at work. I recently had a manager say to me that I just think it's funny or weird when people are emotional or hint at being emotional at work. And I think that's the missing part. I think if you were to unleash that emotional awareness, we'd be able to connect those two things together. And it's something I saw in the reports, but just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I'd love to jump in and just share one quick story with you. So there's a book, you mentioned the liberal arts degree earlier. There's a book that just came out that George Andrews wrote. I'm going to get the title wrong, but it references the useless liberal arts degree, and he's not saying that, he's saying it's an enormously important degree, and the first chapter of the book is about a concept that he's coined called the empathy economy. And his argument is your argument. It's actually that as all of the things you just called out are occurring, the skills that will become the most valuable and are arguably the most uniquely human are those within the empathy economy. And the example that he cites is OpenTable, the company, right, where you make your bookings, and it turns out that they figured out that they could monetize their data because they have an enormous amount of data about how and when and what people want from restaurants. So they started doing that, and they started sending their technicians out to restaurants to show the reports to the restaurant managers, and they got absolutely nowhere because no one wanted to see the data in a spreadsheet. So then they went back and they kind of rethought their model, and they started hiring liberal arts students who understood how to relate well to others, who would take the report from the data scientists that they had at OpenTable, bring that into a restaurant, sit down with the restaurant manager, and explain to them what the data means and why it matters. And so that's his story, not mine, but I think it's absolutely your point, which is it is fundamentally relational, and as long as humans are still decision makers and at least part of this economy, I think the rise of the empathy economy is something to really consider as we are talking about learning and working.
You want to add something, Lisa? Saw the microphone going up.
Just to echo that this WeQ is all about that, and you know, in an ideal world, all these skills will be mainstreamed 5 years from now, and in the workforce development programs, and we absolutely see the need for building all of them.
Yes.
Hi. So it sounds like one of the major things that needs to change is how we look at higher education, and maybe beyond the 4-year degree or 2-year degree into something like badges or micro-masters, something like that. I work in K-12 with KIPP Massachusetts, and right now, I mean, our kind of goal, our vision is supporting kids to and through college, because that is the best thing we can do to prepare them for. And right now, I can't really see us saying we're going to prepare our kids to do some alternative thing, because it's not necessarily accepted by businesses yet. And that forces us then to focus on, well, how do we get them into college? And it's not WeQ and creating and solving, right? It's ACTs, it's MCAS standardized tests. And that kind of limits, I feel like, K-12's ability to address this. So I guess long term, how do we get businesses to take alternative degrees and credentials more seriously, to maybe then see the effects trickle down and free K-12 to really address those skills?
And so there have been a few attempts to try to determine what credentials employers would accept, none of which have taken hold. There's one now called Credential Engine, which is trying to get through a business roundtable to think how would we more ubiquitously create some standards around competencies, so more competency-based rather than just degree-based. I would say it's not 10 to 15 years, it's 5 to 10 years, if I thought time frame. So then I think, what are you doing with your 3rd grader versus your 8th grader, right? In terms of how do you shift to both grab the new as opposed to not disadvantage someone in a society that still says there's a penalty for not having a degree. And I think I talk to young adults. In fact, one gentleman who works at MIT, he just got one of your service awards at MIT, which is a coveted award at MIT. Greg Walton was highlighted across this whole university. Greg not only had spent a year in jail when he was 17, came out, got a job, did great. He's been at MIT 9 years now, owns his own home, done well. And I was talking the other day, I said, Greg, you need to finish your BA. Right, because I'm still going to tell him that, even because I can't buck society. And he said, Gerald, help me understand this. I'm making a good salary right now, and it's actually far above the average in this country. And he said, if I get 2 more Microsoft certified professional assessments, I'm going to make another $15,000 here. So tell me why I need to go back and sit in English 102 or 101. Help me understand how that helps my family. Oh, and just to remind you, I grew up with no father. I was taken away from my mother. I grew up in foster care and shelter. I have never had any stability in my entire life. I give my children stability today, And after work, I get to go home and tuck my kids in bed. I never had that. So it also explained to me why I need to now go to school and sit in the classroom for 3 hours when I need to be with my children. So I kind of sat and said, who am I projecting onto Greg right now? And I was projecting Gerald's reality onto Greg's reality. As opposed to his very good question is, help me understand why I need to do this versus my other options and versus my reality of where I came from. And it just got me thinking, okay, what advice am I giving now to a young person who had a very different set of circumstances leading them to where they are today? And he's one of the literally respected employees here at MIT. So I'm struggling with it because I think we're in this flux point between these two.
I think there's a really important side of the badging and credentialing conversation that we don't love to talk about, and that's earning power and wage. So in healthcare, you see tons of credentials and badges because a lot of those credentials are tied to, well, first of all, they're tied to compliance, so that's a really easy way to scale them. They're also directly tied to wage. If you demonstrate that you know how to do this skill or competency, you will make this much more money. And so we've actually been running a pilot with a retail credential, and just, in full disclosure with all of you, it has not adopted like wildfire. And I'll tell you why. There's 3 reasons why. One, we didn't put a wage premium on it. As an employer, we didn't promise the learners they would earn more if they got it. 2, what learner is out there running around going, I can't wait to earn my retail credential? That's not a thing. And it's a wonderful promise, it's a wonderful idea, but that's not fair. You don't get to just run around and test that on folks who are depending on the salary they earn to support often not just themselves, but themselves and their family and sometimes their parents, right? So I think the question you ask is enormously important, which is folks have to be able to support themselves and their families, and so pushing on them, but you don't need a college degree to do it. Okay, well then our kids cannot go to college, right? If that's really true, I think it's folks who have had access to privilege that need to get really comfortable with saying to our own children, it's okay if you don't go to college. And when that starts to happen, then I think K-12 has the permission to do that, but I wouldn't tell my son that today. Not yet, maybe soon, but not quite yet, right? So I just, the wage question and what earning potential looks like on the other side of degrees or credentials or badges is very real. Even if you have the skills, you have to be able to communicate to an employer that you are worth this wage. We don't do that yet.
And we're at the top. Oh, thank you. We're at the top of the hour, but I can't help but ask one final question. This is the lightning round. In a sentence or less, what do you hope to see happen in the next 5 years in the future of work?
So I just said it. We hope to see these skills streamlined and out there as the baseline.
I hope that we can take, in the next 5 years, some of the models that you're finding in the IIC, that we're finding in this group, and help the people that can't get the college degrees get into jobs as society figures out what it's going to do about college degrees and everything in the future.
I'd love for companies writ large to actually look a lot more widely as to who they think are talented and reduce some of the barriers they have today to allow folks to get a look at a job that actually pays a livable wage.
I'd love for the movement around personalization and learning that we've seen rise in K-12 to start to extend to working adults.
A run-on sentence in sight. So very well done. So with that, please join me in thanking our panelists.
We have a 15-minute break for mingling and food, and then we're back here for the ideation session.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.